Hey, what's up everybody? It's Kevin here with Horology Project. Another video for you today. Back at it with another Tudor. One of my favorite watch brands out there. This particular Tudor has been one that has been on my list for a while, as well as a lot of other people's lists. A little bit of a harder watch to get, and bum-ba-da-bum. Here we go. We have the Black Bay 58. Isn't this watch a beauty? I've been wanting this watch for a while, and I've been wearing it for a while actually, but just for the sake of a glam shot, decided to make it look like I was opening it up for the first time. But let's talk about this watch. So here we have the Black Bay 58. Just a beautiful, beautiful dive watch, very coveted piece right now in the watch community, and with good reason. So let's talk about the sizing of this watch. You have 39 millimeters across the bezel of this watch, about 47.5 millimeters from lug tip to lug tip, 20 millimeters in width from the lug distance right here, and we have 11.9 millimeters in thickness. So why is this watch really popular? This is a 1958 reissue of sorts of a Tudor Submariner, which would have been a recreation, if you will, of a Rolex Submariner. As we know, Rolex Submariners are really popular watches, but in recent years, the Rolex Submariner has taken on a very different look. Most notably, the lugs have gotten a little chunkier because it has protruding end links. The length across it is also a little bigger. They're thicker than this watch as well, and they have a ceramic bezel. Now, don't get me wrong. The Rolex Submariner are gorgeous watches. I love them. I love the older ones. I love the newer ones. I'm not gonna say that they're an ugly watch. However, for those that have longed for older times, who have looked to the past to see something that they enjoy, the Black Bay 58 really fills that chasm. It's a vintage styled watch with all new mechanical upgraded 2018 styling, that's the year that this watch came out. You know, what's really neat about the year that this watch came out was another watch came out as well called the Tudor GMT. That was a really popular GMT modeled watch, and in some ways it stole the show of Baselworld in 2018, while the Black Bay 58 was a little bit more in its shadow. But since the years of its release, it's really just continued to gain popularity. There aren't a lot of dive watches out there that are as popular as this Black 58, and part of that is because for whatever reason, the trend for the last couple of decades has been to make watches bigger and bigger, while this Tudor is looking to the past and taking a design inspiration from how it was made before. So I have 6.5 inch wrist, and as you can see on my below average in size wrist, it looks really great. So even though this watch is smaller in proportion, it's not dainty by any modern standards, or at least by any standards that you should withhold. It's really a beautiful watch. Let's talk a little bit more about it. The movement inside of this watch is a Tudor in-house movement that is COSC certified. That means it has been, it's met the COSC certifications to hold a certain level of timekeeping in certain positions, temperatures, etc. The movement is a staggering 70 hours worth of power reserve, and it beats at over 2,800 beats per hour, or 28,000 beats per hour, that is. The bezel on this watch is a 60-click bezel, which is a little bit different from 120-click, which is more what people are used to today. But listen to this bezel. Beautiful. Perfect lining up. What's neat is when it hits that 12 marker, for whatever reason, I think they cut into it a little differently. So it stays a little bit more locked in that 12 o'clock compared to the other ones. So even if you have your eyes closed, you can kind of feel your way when it hits that 12 marker. The dial is a black matte dial with gilt finishing and some rose gold plating on the dial, as well as the hands, with the bezel also being in that gilt rose gold coloring. Just realized I was peeling some oranges and still got the oranges on my hands. So anyways, the watch has really beautiful finishing overall. It's brushed on the top surfaces of the lug, going inwards, and it has beautiful chamfered edges and a brush pattern going down. A controversial point on this watch has been the bracelet. As you can see, it has faux rivet bracelet, and that would have been indicative of this time period, as they would use these rivets to secure the watch band. However, it's just for looks. I am not a fan of the faux rivet bracelet, and it is one of my criticisms with this watch. But admittedly, when it's on the wrist, it's not as noticeable. One thing you may notice though, while it's on the wrist, is that even though this has a 20 millimeter lug width, it tapers down to 16 millimeters at the clasp. Now that's normal for watches that choose to have a taper, just like it would have a 6 to 16 millimeter taper on a Rolex Submariner. But however, what is different about it is, since it's a rivet bracelet, it has a step taper. So instead of it being kind of a smooth taper down, it kind of steps down. See that? So it's a little bit more dramatic. Some people may like that a little more. I personally would have liked without the rivets and then just a clean taper down. I do like the rivet caps on this. I think that looks cool, and it just kind of gives it a little bit of a different look. I just don't like this. For whatever reason, I feel like it's a little gothic and or that goth style with all the studded stuff. And so for me, it doesn't do anything. The crystal on this is a domed sapphire crystal, which is another added benefit for this watch because it's a raised dome sapphire crystal, which means that this watch is really scratch resistant at the crystal, since sapphire is such a hard material to scratch. So it'll probably save your bezel from getting nicks and scratches itself. But it is worth noting that this is an aluminum bezel, so that can scratch easier. It'll still take a good knock, and likely it'll knock the crystal before the bezel, but it can happen. The watch is very proportionate in size, or similar in size to a 5-digit Submariner, if you're used to holding that, with the difference being that the bezel is not overhanging on the watch. So it sits completely flush to the case, making it a true 39 millimeter. However, this usually means that there is a sacrifice on performance in rotation. However, this is pretty good. If it was over the bezel just a little bit to make it a 40 millimeter watch, like the Submariners, it would be even better. But I have no problem rotating this bezel, and I don't push it in or anything like that. It rotates pretty good. The The crown on this watch is a beautiful Tudor rose crown. Shield on the dial, crown on the, rose on the crown. And it does both thread in and out beautifully. Let's see if you can hear the sound signature. I'll bring it up to the microphone. Very soft, very quiet. You probably don't hear it. Very smooth. So here's what I love about this watch. I think you can't get a better sized watch. This is perfect proportions, both from its thickness, its lug to lug, its case size. I mean, 40 millimeters is fine too, but for what's on the market right now, this is just fantastic. I know some people don't like the snowflake hands. I'm totally fine with it. And then a huge bonus for me is the articulating end links. I actually don't like it when the end links come out because it just elongates the lug to lug on a watch, so it makes it wear a little bigger. So this watch and my Speedmaster have very similar lug to lug, but because my Speedmaster has end links that protrude out, the Speedmaster end links, if you measure it right there, is about 53 millimeters. So it makes the watch wear a little less comfortable and a little bigger on the wrist. So because of that, this is just really tight, compact, very, very comfortable. I love I think this bezel probably has the best crunch, if that makes sense, or sound signature is probably a better word, than any other bezel I have used, including Rolex. Just phenomenal. The movement has been very, very accurate for me with almost no deviation. I've been anywhere around 1.6 to 2 seconds a day. Very low amount of deviation. Power reserve is fantastic. Overall execution of this watch has been great and really nothing to complain about. Now, let me talk about some of the negatives of this watch. I've mentioned a couple. One of those being, I'm not a crazy fan of those rivets, but I am a crazy fan about this clasp. Because it has the ceramic ball bearings on there, when you close it, just a great sound. And those ceramic ball bearings will spare the metal there from being worn down too much. And then same goes for this clasp, it also has ceramic ball bearings there. So just sometimes I even open and close it just because I love the way it sounds so much. Very reassuring. But I'm not a fan of these faux rivets. I'm not crazy about the step down. I do think it picks up scratches relatively easy. But because the finishing is the way it is, it's not too much of a problem. I do wish the mirror finishing on the side, or the brush, or the polished finishing on the side. Here I try to wipe it down a little bit. I don't know if that worked. I do wish that the polished finishing on the side has had a little bit more of a mirror finish. This is a criticism that I have of a lot of watches. Once I had my Grand Seiko, that Zaratsu finishing is just insane, and it's literally mirror-like. And because I've enjoyed that, it has kind of spoiled my other watches now in what I think about them. Another criticism that I have about the Black Bay 58 is I'd love to see one with a date window and one that didn't have so strong of a vintage look. That might not be a criticism for many, but it's a criticism for me. This does have that Sean Connery Goldfinger look to it, so it's pretty much as close as you can get to that without actually purchasing the genuine article, which that would be very cost prohibitive. The price on this watch has gone up to $3,700 from an AD once you've joined a wait list likely, but the wait times aren't too bad. When I went to an AD, I was quoted for about 2 months. of a wait time. So I think for most people, 2 to 6 months is probably very realistic on this watch. I don't know what it's going to be now, considering everything that's going on, and the watch factories in Switzerland have closed up, but we'll see. Huge positive are those chamfered edges. Love that. I wish Rolex would bring that back. To speak of another negative now that I just mentioned Rolex is I do feel like Rolex purposefully nerfed this watch. That is, they made it a little less, they kind of purposely didn't make it as good as I think it could be. Here's why. It has a 60 click bezel instead of a 120 click bezel. What I mean here is that they're purposefully not making it in the category of a Submariner, even though they probably could. So 60 click bezel instead of 120 click bezel. No crown guards instead of having crown guards, so you get less protection on the crown. That could just be because it's a 1958, so I'll let that pass. But the 60 click bezel, there's no reason for that. Another thing is Tudor already has the Pelagos with a quick adjust on the bracelet. This only has 3 anchors of micro adjust, and it comes with no half links. Another thing is obviously the aluminum. They could have done, if they wanted to keep the matte, if they wanted to keep the vintage look, they could have easily done a matte ceramic at this price range, but they chose to do the aluminum instead. Now I know for some, they're going to prefer the aluminum because the aluminum can age, but at this price point, it just seems intentional. I believe that they are intentionally keeping certain upgrades away from this watch, even them taking away, because if you think about it, the Black Bay Heritages that first came out did have the traditional Rolex styled bracelet with a nice taper. And I think they are purposefully trying to separate their watches from a Submariner, because basically if you want all those things and you want to be in the house of Tudor or Rolex, you have to buy the Rolex Submariner. So I think all that stuff is purposeful in what they're doing there. But overall, it is a great watch. I recommend you try it out for yourself before you buy it. It can feel a little underwhelming, and I think a part of that is because it is similar to a Rolex Explorer 1 or just an Explorer, because it is very simple in its design. But a lot of its charm comes from its simplicity. So I think that is definitely what makes it a great watch and one worth having on your wrist, is that it is a very simple design. And because of that, it's unlikely that it'll go out of style. I think this watch will continue to be appreciated in the years to come. All right, guys. Well, that's my video on the Tudor Black Bay 58. I hope you enjoyed it. Feel free to ask any questions that you might have about my Black Bay 58 if you're considering buying it. And what do you think? Do you think that I'm right in saying that Tudor has purposefully nerfed their watches to not compete with Rolex? Or do you think that this is the best that they can do in that price category? I'd love to hear your thoughts below. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. I'll catch you in the next one.